What's good, Savages? Welcome to Blue Collar Sports. I'm your host, Savage Paulson, and with me, as always, is my resident sports expert, Zach McGibbon. How's it going, Zach?
Doing pretty good. I'm glad you called me a sports expert. Some of my friends don't call me a sports expert. They just call me a casual fan sometimes with some of the takes. But I think I hit it pretty well, especially with the college football takes in the past episodes. So
Yeah,
but no, I'm looking forward to this and a lot happening in the world of sports.
I'll tell you this: if I compare you to myself, yeah, you're definitely between both of us. You are definitely the expert. So I'm really glad you're with me again today. There's a few things, like I said, I sent you a message that I'd like to discuss today, and so we'll start here. College football championship game is set. Fighting Irish Notre Dame versus Buckeyes Ohio State. What is your reaction of the semis and the Cotton Bowl and the Rose Bowl? Right? Is that what it was? Right?
It
Rose
was
Bowl
the Orange Bowl, I thought.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Orange Bowl and Cotton Bowl. What's your reaction on both games, and what can we expect from your point of view for the championship game?
Yeah, I thought both games were a lot of fun. Obviously, as a Longhorns fan, a little bit of a tough loss in the Cotton Bowl, and
yeah.
I was hoping that with it being in Texas, in AT&T Stadium, that game, that maybe the home field advantage would be plentiful, and it looked like it was going to be. And then the last couple of plays for Texas didn't turn out too well. I'll talk about that in a moment. But
right,
in terms of the Orange Bowl with Penn State and Notre Dame, it was kind of the matchup I was expecting. It was pretty close to a back and forth as you could get.
Right.
And really, at the end of it, it just led to a mistake at the end by Drew Aller going across the field, which is just, one of the biggest sins you could commit as a quarterback is
right.
when you're bootlegging out to the left side and then going back in and try and throw it, center of the field. Not something you want to do as a QB. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I thought that was a really good game. I really like Marcus Freeman as a coach. I think he's got that coaching moxie so far. And I know he came off of that loss to Northern Illinois, which is not exactly a household college name
right
to lose to, but I think they were able to bounce back from that and really put together a stream of momentum. And I think Notre Dame, their players are locked in. I think they got some good players on that squad. Penn State continues to show that, they could beat the teams that they could beat, but when it comes to a ranked team, it's very, very tough for them. And I will say it wasn't the coach's fault at the end of it all. I thought Drew Aller did not have a great game at all at QB. He's still young. I don't think he's going to go in the NFL draft. I think he's going to play another year. I think he's already mentioned he's going to commit to another year in college. And I think that's the best route for him to get better. And I think he's only like 20, 21. So still got plenty of time to grow and develop. But I thought that was a really fun game just as entertainment property. It showed that the playoff is working decently well, especially once we, narrow down with some of the higher quality teams.
Right.
And then in the Cotton Bowl, Texas, I missed the first half because I was calling hockey last night as we're recording, but I was following along on my phone in between periods just to see how the game was going. I was able to catch the second half, and I thought that, they were shutting down Jeremiah Smith, the Longhorns were, and Jeremiah Smith was that guy that you circle on the Ohio State Buckeyes to shut him down because he could be a dynamic player, averaging over 100 yards at least receiving yards, in some cases over 150 receiving yards. And they were able to shut him down to 1 catch and 3 yards. So I can't complain too much about the Longhorns shutting down that sort of threat.
Right.
But that defense for Ohio State, we mentioned it last episode, but they really came to the forefront, and it really came to the forefront on that last drive for Texas because they were moving the ball down the field. They were looking really, really good. And then they got to that 1 yard line, and it just seemed like they couldn't fit through. Now, Sarkisian calling a toss play on second down, going backwards and trying to find the hole, when those linebackers at Ohio State are very good at finding the holes in the offensive line and bursting through. Not a great play call, especially at that point in the game. I was, to say the least, I was a little frustrated as a Longhorns fan that was the play call on second down. And then, obviously, they went for it on fourth down, and Ewers fumbled the ball to his old roommate. They kept emphasizing that on the broadcast.
Right, it was
like, oh, they were roommates.
Times. Yeah.
They were roommates. They should have mentioned it a couple more times to really emphasize the points, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a tough final drive as a Longhorns fan, but I thought that was a really good football game. And I do like this matchup, but I'm sticking with, Ohio State winning it all at the end. I think that team's just really, really good. And I think the test that Texas was able to put against Ohio State was going to be a tougher test for them than the Notre Dame defense.
Right.
I'm sure Notre Dame will be looking at notes and, writing down, okay, this is how you stop Jeremiah Smith and make sure that he's not a threat. But yeah, I still have Ohio State winning. I think they just looked way too good. And I think they are going to give a little bit of a shock to the system to Notre Dame.
All good points. Here's a few things I got from a different perspective. So I kind of caught about half of the Notre Dame Penn State game. And so I'm looking at the stat lines. I was checking it out before. And one of the things that jumped out at me immediately, and I think made a big difference in the game, was third downs. Penn State was 3 for 11, and Notre Dame was 11 for 17. That's a huge gap right there. Not converting on those third downs. And I think that was ultimately the difference in what, was a very close game in the end. Again, from my perspective, both those teams aren't teams that I really pay attention to during the season. I look through the highlights and I try to make sense out of it. I did watch the game, and I did think that at the end of the day, better team won, and that was just better execution. Like I said, the third down is really what jumped out at me. As far as last night's game, I think the momentum was, I remember watching the end of the first half. I don't know if you caught the end of the first half, but the Longhorns had a long drive. They put 7 points on the board. And then with less than a minute left, the Buckeyes had that screenplay that ended up in I don't know how many yards, touchdown, and
75 yards. As a Longhorns fans, I kept note of that. So 75 yards.
That kind of I was like, ooh, that's tough going into the half where you thought things were turning around for the Longhorns. And then after that, it kind of stayed a really, really tight game until everything in the end kind of unraveled for the Longhorns. When they had that drive, it's funny because I was watching the game and they were driving and things were going well, and they get to the 1 yard line. The drive for the Buckeyes before this, they also drove the ball very well and got to the 1 yard line. And I remember I was watching it with my wife, and my wife said, they got 4 tries on the 1 yard line. She's like, it's like, how often do they miss? And she's like, it's pretty easy at this point. I'm like, okay, easy might not be the word, but I do understand that more often than not, you will convert if you're on the 1 yard line. But I said, sometimes you don't. And then the very next drive for the Longhorns, it's exactly what happened. It's funny because we got to the 1 yard line. First down, they tried to running down. I think they went down the middle and they got stuffed. And I said, you might see it here. I said, and I remember distinctively before the second down, the camera panned from like a side shot of all the Buckeye linemen. I go, look at the size of these men right here. And my wife went, yeah, maybe this is where it happens. And then when they got that second down, that toss, I was like, then they went back a few yards. I was like, yeah, they're not getting in here. I don't think then. And then it kind of changed from there. I went like, oof. That's where I went just like you. I think the Buckeyes defense is really, really strong. And I think that's ultimately what's going to win them the championship.
And one other quick stat I wanted to throw out there, going back to the Orange Bowl, and this popped in my head, and I thought that was kind of something when I read it, was Drew Aller, all of his completions were not to wide receivers.
Yes, I did see that. That's crazy.
That's a crazy stat.
Right.
Like not one completion to one of his wideouts. Now, Penn State's not necessarily known for having the greatest wide receivers coming out of college.
Right.
I think the most prominent receiver in the last decade, and I spoke with a buddy of mine who's a big Penn State guy. He said probably the most prominent wide receiver to come out of Penn State was Jahan Dotson. And when you think of the last 10 years, it's Jahan Dotson, who's like a wide receiver 2 at best for some teams, right?
Right.
That's not exactly like a high churn out of high quality wide receivers. So
It's interesting from a fan's perspective like me that's kind of new to college football in the last couple of years on how things function. You'll have a team like the Longhorns where you look at their drives yesterday, and one of the things that jumped out at me was how easy it seemed for them to complete their passes, like their play. It was just like so they were very efficient in their pass plays, and they would use the run play to kind of set up their pass plays. And it's just that I guess that's the result of having a competent quarterback and at a college level, right? Because I tried to explain to my wife the other day, I said, this is completely different from the NFL a little bit because in the NFL, every team has a great quarterback. Every single quarterback in the league deserves to be there. And then sometimes in college football, you have teams that win and it has nothing to do with the quarterback. It's because they have good wideouts. It's because they have a strong running game. It's because their defense is just unpenetrable. Like, there's a lot more, I guess, chess pieces that for different teams, you know? So there's a lot more tangibles, I guess, for different types of teams and different types of program. And it's interesting to see when you get down to the Final Four is where you see more of the resemblance of an NFL game plan and how they execute. You know, better coaching. You see how the coaching is important, and you see, and that's what I love it. That's what makes me like. Yesterday, I was watching the game, and I was like, man, I think I kind of like college football almost as much as I do because it's obviously the same sport, but for me, there's different tangibles that make it different. It's a different experience for me when I watch it compared to the NFL.
Yeah, there's a lot of tradition in college football.
Right.
There's a lot of pageantry, and that's one of the things that kind of drew me into the sport when I was getting into college football. I always tell people, so like the reason why I'm a Longhorns fan is because of the 2006 Rose Bowl, where Texas beat USC for the national championship, and Vince Young walked into the end zone.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so that was kind of my. So I was pretty casual when it came to college football throughout the years after, but I was following along with guys like Colt McCoy was the quarterback at Texas, and then it became now one of the backup quarterbacks for the Indianapolis Colts, whose name escapes me, but Sam Ehlinger. And so it's been like different, generations of QB at Texas, and so and throughout all that, it's just been the pageantry and the tradition and the different playbooks that are utilized in college football as opposed to an NFL pro style offense. Like you could see, college programs utilize more simplistic, for lack of a better term, playbooks.
Right.
Like you see a lot more option offenses where they have the quarterback run and then try and pitch it off to the running back, or they keep it on the ground. And in the NFL, you see a lot more like with Kyle Shanahan, he uses a lot of motion in his offenses, and his receivers are always going down the sideline, or they always have these, assignments and these zone beaters. And so that's what makes college football so unique, right? Because it's and like you mentioned, like the talent level, like, a great example, I think, of like a team that was such a great team, but the quarterback was kind of was the 2001 Miami Hurricanes. Like, you look at that 2001 team, like Jonathan Velma, Sean Taylor, Ed Reed, and that's on defense. The running backs was literally like Willis McGahee, Clinton Portis, and Frank Gore were all on the Miami running back squad. Andre Johnson was at wide receiver. You look at all of this talent that's on that 2001, really the rosters from 2001 to 2004 of the Miami Hurricanes. And the quarterback is Ken Dorsey, right? Like, who's now no longer the offensive coordinator at Cleveland, but that kind of goes to show, right? Like, if you've got the talent around you in college football,
right.
Like, it's not quarterback. Obviously, if you have a great quarterback, like, you're going to do pretty well. But I also like college football because you can go and watch a team be like, okay, when you go and watch Colorado, for instance, and I know that Shedeur Sanders is a very good quarterback, will likely be a first-round draft pick, but you look at when Travis Hunter plays, you're like, that's a guy that could take over a game,
right?
Literally on both ends of the ball. So that's what makes college football so unique for me.
Before I ask you your predictions, I'm going to fix my camera here. It's out of focus. I've been having this problem. I'm trying to fix it. There you go. Is it? There you go. So, predictions for the championship game. I think you mentioned you think that Ohio State is going to take it. Do you have any X factor that you think that might turn this game around in a big way for the Fighting Irish?
For the Fighting Irish, like if they're able to emulate what Texas did and shut down Jeremiah Smith and limit that running back duo that they have at Ohio State, I think they could keep it competitive. Like Notre Dame has some good running backs as well, but I look at Ohio State, Judkins especially, at the running back position. Like they've got some good weapons there, and if they force it to be, a Will Howard kind of game for Ohio State, they could keep it competitive because I'm not as confident in Will Howard at QB to be the guy that could take over a football game. I think he's just got some good talent around him, and sometimes that's all you really need, like we mentioned, right? But if you take away those options for him, I think Notre Dame can keep it competitive, and Notre Dame themselves, they have a good running back there, and the QB's not too bad. But like again, Notre Dame, I want to make it clear, Notre Dame's got a good football team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really like the coaching that Freeman has put together, but it'd be tough for me to see Ryan Day just falter in this against Notre Dame, and I think he's going to coach a really good game, and I think Ohio State's going to win this one.
Too. I think the coaching is going to be advantage Buckeyes. I think he's done a great job. I saw it. And at the end of the day, I think their defense is just going to carry the load for the most part and let their offense just go to work, So I think from my perspective, from what I've noticed and what I've paid attention to in the last few weeks of being, again, someone that is not really like involved to the point where you might be involved when you're like down in like knowing the players and stuff, but as far as the football that I see, like I'm starting to notice certain patterns, and I definitely think they're definitely built like a championship team. Again, I'm not saying Notre Dame doesn't have a strong team. They do. Like I agree with a lot of the points you brought, but I do. At the end of the day, if you put a gun to my head, I'd go with the Buckeyes for the championship. So we'll move on from college football to NFL football. The playoffs are upon us. It's my favorite time of year. It's the wild card weekend. A lot of football. It starts today. It starts like in about 30 minutes, 25 minutes from now, about the first game on schedule, which is Houston versus the Chargers, right?
Yep, LA Chargers.
Right, LA Chargers. I'm like, come on, bud. Yeah, so there's a lot of games here, so I'll just say I think there's going to be I don't know why I had a feeling, but I think there's going to be a couple of upsets this wildcard weekend. I think the Chargers are going to beat Texans. I don't know what it is about the Texans. I had high hopes for them at the beginning of the season. I'm a big CJ Stroud fan. And so I loved not only his type of play, but his attitude and bravado that he brings to the table. Like I remember watching him on certain podcasts and say he just exudes confidence. Like I'd rarely seen a more confident young quarterback than him. And he's very confident, and you could tell he has a very high knowledge of the game when he speaks, when he schemes. You could tell he can read defense. So I like even in the offseason, like I'm a sports cards collector, and I bought some of his rookie cards thinking that, it was going to be, I would get money out of it.
Right.
I haven't lost any yet, but I don't think it was going up as much as I could simply because of maybe it's not the play. Maybe you can illuminate me on this. Maybe you could tell me what the issue is. But I thought they were maybe an 11, maybe even a 12-win team this season. They ended up 10 and what was their record? They ended up 10-7. So still not bad, but for me, at the beginning of the season, I thought that Houston was going to win their division and go, at least to the conference finals. And I don't think I can put them there now. I think they're going to have a hard time against the Chargers.
I agree. I think the Texans kind of took I don't want to say a step back, because obviously they're in the playoffs again. They're first in their division. But that division isn't exactly, boasting with competitive teams either.
Right.
That division has been kind of tough when it comes to or rather, kind of easy with some of the teams. Like the Colts didn't have a great season. The Jaguars really took a step back this year, and now they fired Doug Peterson in that AFC South division. So it
Right.
was really all up for the Texans taking. I don't think Stroud has been horrible, but he certainly has not been that. When he first showed up on the scene in that first year, it was like, okay, this guy is going to be a name to keep an eye on, potentially maybe even be in the MVP caliber race in the next couple
Absolutely.
of years. Obviously, that hasn't happened. There are still some good players on that squad. Some of it, I think, also had to do, they lost Nico Collins for a few weeks
Yeah,
during the season.
absolutely. I
And when
love
you
their
lose-
wideouts. Tank Dell, Nico
Yeah.
Collins, young players there. I also bought a lot of their rookie cards on the offseason because I was a big believer. Again, I thought CJ Stroud was gonna tear the league up this season, and he didn't. But yeah, I still think they're a strong team. Don't get me wrong, but I think the Chargers will take that one. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off there.
No, it's all very good points there, especially Tank Dell too, and seeing that reaction he had, seeing a friend of his really getting that devastating injury, and Stephon Diggs hasn't really taken over like I think people were maybe thinking he could.
Right.
I know in that final year in Buffalo, it was a rather tumultuous time with Stephon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills, but I think they were hoping for something a little bit more with Stephon Diggs, because right now in the league, you notice like they're really trying to invest in receiver for a lot of these quarterbacks, because it's obviously a lot more of a passing league now. So it used to be you have the primary number one receiver and maybe a number two. Now it's like you need to have at least 3 good receivers that you can rely on. And if your tight end's fantastic, even better, right? So that's what the Texans were kind of investing in. And plus they had Joe Mixon come in at running back, and he's been solid, coming in for the Texans and providing that running support. But I agree with you. I think the Chargers are going to get the victory in this playoff game. I like Jim Harbaugh a lot.
Same here.
His style is very simple. It's like, we're just going to run the ball. We're going to pound it down your throat. And then every once in a while, because, hey, we've got Justin Herbert at quarterback, we'll fake it out and we'll throw the ball to Lad McConkey, and we'll just continue to do that throughout the entirety of the game. And so, before the season started, I tried to get as much of the LA Chargers running backs as I could, because I'm like, man, like they're not going to, put up these amazing seasons, but they're going to put up some great fantasy points, because they're going to be relied on so much in that offense. And it was going to be interesting for LA this past year because, both of their receivers were gone due to free agency or a trade. Keenan Allen, obviously the number one receiver, being let go, and I find him to be a very underrated receiver. But really, he had to rely on Quentin Johnson, who, has had some drops in his first couple of years in the league and not looked like the guy out of TCU. And then relying on Lad McConkey, a rookie out of Georgia, who's a good receiver, but, rookies are always, hit or miss, right? Sometimes you land on them the first year,
Absolutely.
and then other times it's not going to be good. In their case, Lad McConkey has been a real solid threat, a real solid weapon for this this Chargers squad. And I like the defense that the Chargers put together. Really, the only thing that kind of puts me off with the Chargers is that it's the LA Chargers, and that they've always had these great teams, right? You look back at, Phillip Rivers, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Antonio Gates, all these great players that have gone to the Chargers, and what have they kind of showed for it in that time? They're one of those great examples of a great regular season team, but as soon as the playoffs roll around, they just they seem to either disappear or just they get these heartbreaking losses. And that's what I'm kind of worried about here with the Chargers. Now, having said that, I really like Jim Harbaugh. I think he's a guy, it's clearly he's one of those personalities where he might get annoyed with him after a couple of years, because that seemed to be what happened in San Francisco before he went to Michigan. But I've got the Chargers over the Texans here. I still think there's some growing to do in Houston. And I think this is a chance for Justin Herbert as well to kind of cement himself. He hasn't really had that chance to showcase himself in the playoffs at a high level. And so this could be a chance for him now that he's got Jim Harbaugh as his coach. So I agree with you. I got the Chargers over the Texans.
I think Justin Herbert, I remember from his rookie season, I always thought that guy was a superstar. And I was very surprised how the, season 2, 3, and 4 kind of unfolded for him. It's just like I expected a lot more from him. And again, you see it this season, like I think he's thrown like 3 interceptions all year, right? So, but it's a product of running the ball a lot,
Yeah.
obviously, right?
They,
So,
they are built on efficiency.
right.
And being efficient with the ball, and that's kind of, you know, Herbert doesn't have these stats that are going to, you know, blow you away, but that's like what you mentioned. It's also because they're not having to rely on him to make all these big time throws like they would in the past. Like one year he had 5,000 yards passing. This year he's got 3,800 yards passing.
That's right.
So it's just part of the offense that he's in now.
One thing you did say that's going to bring me to this next matchup is the lack of receivers on a lot of teams. Like you mentioned, you need not just one good receiver or even two. Like to make this, to play in the NFL right now and to be able to win, you need 2 to 3 good wideouts with a great tight end. And it brings me to my Steelers versus the Ravens, a divisional matchup in the wild cards. Always exciting, obviously. I could sit here and tell you a lot of ranting on my Steelers this season. It was a very emotional I wouldn't say up and down. I'll tell you like this. When I came into the season, I didn't know what my expectations should be, especially when they went from having Wilson as the starter, then getting injured, and then switching to Justin Fields, and then starting the season 3-0, and then losing 2, and then after that going to Russell Wilson, and then Russell Wilson tearing it up for the first few games, and everybody thought we're Super Bowl bound, and then shit falls apart, and then they finish the season in 4. As much as I want to be positive and know that, listen, the record is great for Steelers in the playoffs against Baltimore. And I will ultimately pick my Steelers to win and upset the Ravens tonight. A lot of it has to do because I'm a fan, all right? I understand. But I think that if they can establish the running game with Harris, like you said, early on, just get the yardage, first down, second down, and just let Russell Wilson and George Pickens go to work. I think Pat Freiermuth is a big aspect at tight end for the Steelers, and I think he's been underutilized in the past, but I think you've seen a lot more from him this season. Be wrong about this, but from my observation, when they are winning games, he's involved in the passing game a lot more, and that just it's explained by the fact that they really only have one wide receiver. Right? And sometimes they have none because for some reason, sometimes George Pickens doesn't feel like playing football. When he doesn't get the ball, he pouts and he moans and he bitches. And I could go off on a rant here, but it's another example of the type of drafting the Steelers have done in the past few years when it comes to wide receivers. You know, they sometimes go for the flashy and it's great, but some of these guys need to grow up a lot faster than they're growing up in the game. But at the end of the day, I think the Steelers, they have the tools to beat the Ravens, and the Ravens are a really good team. I mean, Lamar Jackson is in the MVP running for probably the second or third year in a row, won it last year. Like, he's a great player. They have a strong running game. Like, they have good players. They're well coached. It's going to be a tough game, but at the end, I have to go with my Steelers.
Yeah, I trust me, I'm one of those guys is like I got to stick by my team here. I know it doesn't look great, but I got to be that guy that sticks with the team. And I understand that. I have to go with the Ravens here, unfortunately. I look at everything. I look at Lamar and this type of season he's having. I look at the options that they have, not only at receiver, but you also have Derrick Henry there in the backfield, and he could always be a guy that could take over a game. You know, I look at all that, and plus their tight ends. Like, I know Mark Andrews had sort of a down season comparatively speaking, but he's still an option there. And then that defense has always been solid for Baltimore. Baltimore is one of those teams. I love the Baltimore Ravens as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so consistent, so good at putting together teams. The fan base is fantastic. Honestly, if I wasn't a Cowboys fan, I'd probably be a Ravens fan.
Yeah.
But when you're born as a Cowboys fan, you're born into the team. You just kind of have to stick with them. But I really like this Baltimore Ravens squad. I have the winning, and I just see with Pittsburgh, I think Russell Wilson is a great story, a guy that came in on the veterans minimum and took over for Fields and then showed that he could still play at a high level. And I still think he got a bad shake in Denver. Like the first season
Absolutely.
having a really bad head coach who, of course, is the Jets. So they picked him up and said, let's have him run our offense.
Yeah,
And so, and then Sean Payton coming in, and clearly Sean Payton and Russell Wilson didn't see eye to eye when it came to
absolutely.
how the plays would go.
Yeah,
And so all that, and Arthur Smith, I got to give him credit. He's done much better as offensive coordinator for the Steelers than I thought he would. I thought, the way that he coached in Atlanta, I thought there was a lot of guys that he did not utilize to their maximum strengths. And I understand that Spencer Rattler was the quarterback there, but there were other guys that, you can build a roster around. I mean, Kyle Pitts obviously is always somebody that's talked about. We'll see with him now at this
yeah,
point. But all that to say, I like the Steelers. Again, TJ Watt is always going to be a factor off the edge.
absolutely. I also think TJ Watt is playing injured.
Yes. Oh, playoff time,
Right.
especially.
Yeah, it's a given, but I think there's I think there's a serious enough injury that if they weren't in the position that they are, I think that he might have not played a few games because
Gotcha.
the last few games I've not seen the TJ Watt I normally see on the field. I might be wrong about this. I'm completely wrong, but to me there's something that's missing. He's not as present, but to their credit, his teammates have picked him up. Nick Herbig, the rookie, like that guy, I'm a big fan. I became a big fan of that guy this season, and he's been making some big plays when they need it, and all the other guys, right? Hayward and all these guys, like they make big plays and they pick him up. But I think you're going to see a motivated TJ Watt tomorrow, and I think he's going to make a difference on defense. But listen, it's hard. Again, if I wasn't a Steelers fan, I'd be picking the Ravens. All right. Look, they're first on offense in the league, right? Passing seventh, rushing first, average 187 yards per game, 187 yards per game, 434 offensive yards per game versus 339 for the. So there's some big differences here, and even on defense, rushing first in the league. They give up on average about 80 yards a game, the Ravens. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough task, but my faith is they're going to get George Pickens involved early on so that they can then settle down with the running game and then utilize that once in a while, just go down the field to a Pickens and he'll make the play. He's proven in the past that if you throw the ball in his vicinity, he'll make the play. Last game, we didn't see that from him. And if I know Mike Tomlin like I know Mike Tomlin, he hopefully had a sit down and a talk with him and said, listen, if we're going to win this and if you want to be part of this team, like you're going to have to make those catches. Because he had some drops last game that weren't like him, and I didn't like it. So I think we're going to see a motivated George Pickens for this game, and I think he's going to go for over 120 yards receiving with a couple touchdowns. That'll be my prediction.
You got to answer me this. What's going on with Steelers wide receivers and attitudes? Like it started with Antonio Brown, and you could argue Juju Smith-Schuster as well with the TikToks, and then going into Mapletron and Chase Claypool, and now George Pickens. Like what's going on?
The last episode, I switched my topic of choice. I really wanted to rant on their wide receivers situations. You're absolutely right. Look, Antonio Brown for a solid 4 years was probably the best wide receiver in the league. I think it wasn't even in doubt. He was absolutely a great wide receiver. But obviously with greatness comes what Antonio Brown was just a loony bin, like completely. And he seems to be even off his rocker, even worse now. It's completely buffoon. Chase Claypool, which I thought I really liked the kid when he first came to the league. And then after that, it was the same thing. Juju Smith with the TikToks and I think Juju Smith was like the first player where I realized he's the first of a new generation of these wide receivers. We all know wide receivers have always been flashy, and the best wide receivers from the Randy Moss to the Jerry Rice to all these guys, They've all flashy. You need this confidence to be a good wideout that no other player on the field has. And because you're going up against some of the best athletic players in cornerbacks and in safeties and all these guys on defense, you got to be able to make the play. You got to be faster. You got to be quicker. You got to be more explosive. You got to be all that. And the confidence makes a big shift. Sometimes I think that confidence kind of engulfs everything else. And I think that's what we're seeing with George Pickens right now. I think that he truly believes he's the best wide receiver in the league. And we've seen glimpses of greatness. But I think outside of that greatness, there's more work to be done. You have more role than just catching a ball. This is a team thing. Sometimes you have to block. Sometimes you have to run decoy routes. And you're not doing that. And to be honest, I don't know why it's always been a factor for the Steelers, but it has. I don't know if it starts in the room. I don't know if it starts in the locker room with the wide receiver coaching, with the attitude, with the culture. Maybe it's an effect of Tomlin being a defensive-minded coach first, and the wide receiver maybe not, and the running game as well. Tomlin has always been heavy on the running game, and I think it's a result of the culture in Pittsburgh, where the wide receivers think that they deserve a bit more attention and they don't get it. So then it makes for resentful and bitter sometimes, and they lose their shit, and then they go out their thing. I hope George Pickens sticks with the Steelers. I think the Steelers, all they need to do is next season is focus on adding one more wideout at least. I think they're good at tight end. I think they're set right there. And I think if you can give Russell Wilson or even Justin Fields, honestly, I don't know who's going to be there in that next year, but either or, if you can give these guys an extra weapon to not rely on Najee Harris as much, like I think it'll be a result. Instead of winning 10 games, you might see them win 12 games next season. Who knows? But I'm going with the Steelers, but I got my fingers crossed. I'll be praying to my God definitely before that game. So let's quickly go through tomorrow's game. We spent a lot of times on these two games, which is fine. So tomorrow we got the Denver Broncos against the Buffalo Bills. I'll tell you right now, this is also another game that I'm picking the underdog. For some reason, I woke up a couple days ago and I think the Broncos are going to beat the Bills. I know Josh Allen is the MVP. I know he's a great quarterback, but I don't know. I think it's a gut feeling. If I look at all the stats and all the things, I kind of do my picks based on a gut feeling a lot of the times because it's fucking football. And sometimes, no matter how much you look at the stats and all that stuff, it's just, Bo Nix, there's something about that kid, man. He was able to come into an offense that honestly, after what we saw last year with Russell Wilson, I was like, this guy might be just a bad coach. Like, I want to be a Russell Wilson fan because he's on my team now. And I think we saw that they definitely didn't gel last year. But I think that we now see that he didn't want a veteran quarterback. He wanted a guy that he wanted to mold, and he wanted a young guy. And now he has that guy. And I think that their system and their scheme works. I think Bo Nix has slowly progressed this season. And his confidence is at an all-time high right now, I think. And he's heading into a playoff in his first year. And maybe the lights will be too bright and the pressure will be too big on him. And fucking the Bills are going to crush them. And he won't score a touchdown. He won't throw a touchdown. Maybe he'll have one of those games where he'll go, 9 for 24 and, 84 yards and have a passer rating of what's the lowest passer rating you can get? 50.
I think it's like 50.3, I think is the lowest,
so,
something like that.
Or it's a tight game and the Broncos win on a field goal, where it's just a tick for tack, touchdown for touchdown. Let's go to war and let's see who can win this game. And yeah, everything points towards the Bill, but I'm going to pick the Broncos for this one, and Bo Nix winning his first playoff game in his rookie season.
I like it. I love that we're bringing the takes here on.
Earlier I was like, man, I wish I had a graphic right now where I could push a button and have a hot take, because I was gonna say something about something you said and I completely forgot. Here's my hot take of a point you said earlier. I think Stephon Diggs is overrated.
I like that too. I don't disagree with that much either. I think
I think he
especially
was
with his room.
overrated when he got to Buffalo. And I
Yeah.
think that when he got drafted, the Texans, everybody was like, that finally CJ. I'm like, I'm like, that guy's, I will believe it when I see it. And I didn't see it this year.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
a solid receiver, not a game-breaking receiver.
Exactly.
I think it's the best way to put it.
Right. He
I could definitely see that argument.
right. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to go with the Broncos in this one. Hot
I
take.
like it. And you know what? To kind of play off of your point, Bo Nix is a guy that had to go through adversity all throughout, like even in college football.
Mhm.
Like he started off at Auburn and he was a guy that came in as a 5-star prospect and it just did not work out at Auburn. Like his nickname at Auburn was Bo Picks because he kept throwing interceptions all the time, right? And he goes to Oregon and he has a much better time at Oregon and much better fit there. He gets a lot better. And I think that's where Sean Payton also kind of looked at him and said, this is a guy that can turn it around. And with good coaching, he's willing to listen and learn to get better. And so I think there's something to that. Having said all of that, I would be stunned if the Broncos beat the Bills tomorrow.
Mhm.
I think the Bills are just the much better team. I think there's still work to be done in Denver in terms of putting together the pieces around Bo Nix. I still think there's work to be done there. I like Javonte Williams at running back, but I think the receivers could get a little bit better there. They were always, that receiving core was always like an under the radar receiving core because Cortland Sutton was there. But I think there's still some growth to be there for Denver to get better. I think they could look at this season if they get eliminated tomorrow as a positive, as certainly a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
But I think in terms of Buffalo, I think right now for them, like I'll say this: if Buffalo loses tomorrow to Denver, Sean McDermott's gone. Like, I feel he was on the hot seat getting into this season, and then the season ended up turning out better. But if he loses, in the first round, then there's at least going to be some serious questions about his ability to lead the team into an postseason success. But I don't see that happening. I see Buffalo. They're in Buffalo for this game as well. That's always going to be a factor. It is especially cold right now,
Right.
where we're at. And so
that is a good point. Right.
I just see all of that. And I think the talent that Buffalo has and how locked in they are. I think Joe Brady has tapped into what Josh Allen can do best as the offensive coordinator there for Buffalo. So I'm picking Buffalo over Denver.
Yeah, obviously, you look at Josh Allen, he's having an MVP caliber season. It's hard to pick against him. Again, I'm going with my guts to put with and I love a good underdog. So, right, I'm looking for it to be right on a few of them.
Right.
But before we move on to the other game, I'd like to know, because at the beginning of the season, you looked at the Buffalo Bills, and obviously some people see how they lost Stephon Diggs. We go back to my point where I think he's overrated, but he was still their number one wide receiver. So you go from losing your number one wide receiver, and then you realize, then you look at the depth chart, and you go like, who's going to be their number one guy? Who's going to be the number two guy? Like, what's going on here? How have they been able to make this work? Is it solely because Josh Allen is that good of a quarterback, or is it because some guys just stepped up and delivered for the season?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they're, with my receiver point, I think that's for like the good to great quarterbacks. Like your top 10 to your top 3 are the quarterbacks where they're good, but if they have a receiving core that can help them, they can help get you to the next level.
Right.
And then I think there are some quarterbacks where they're just so talented that no matter the receiving core you put in them, they'll take you very far. And that's a very, very small group. And the only people that come to mind is, Patrick Mahomes. I would throw Josh Allen at this point, the way that he's played this season.
Absolutely.
And I know they traded for Amari Cooper midway through the season, and he's a solid receiver. Obviously, got to see him in Dallas when he was there, and he could be a guy. But the receiving core isn't exactly like this standout receiving core. I really do think it's just Josh Allen is that good. And again, there's only a few QBs in NFL history, really, that I could think that could take over a game on their own. Aaron Rodgers at his peak in Green Bay was that guy for me. But I think Josh Allen is kind of blossoming into that, where he's a guy that could just take over on his own. And the Bills' defenses have always been, at worst, good. They've always been very consistent. And James Cook has kind of been getting better and better at running back. He's not been this, all-star running back or anything like that, but he's given them enough at the running game where they can rely on him so that he could at least be an option in the offense, right?
Right.
So that's how I kind of look at Buffalo. I really do think, though, Josh Allen's kind of taken it over and realized the role that he's in. And plus, when you have based on rumors and speculation, so I'll say that, but based on the attitude that Stephon Diggs had in the locker room, and now you kind of have that negative presence of the locker room out of there, and everybody feels a lot more upbeat, and they feel like they can play football, and Josh Allen doesn't have to worry about targeting Stephon Diggs on plays.
Absolutely.
I think it's opened him up as well. So I think that's really where you've seen this Buffalo team really come together this season.
Absolutely. I also think Josh Allen stepped it up as far as the leadership role on the team. With Stephon Diggs leaving, I think it opened up the door for him to become a better leader, and I think that might have to do with it. I think he's a great leader, obviously on the field by his play, but also in the locker room as well. And I think that might have been a factor this season for the Buffalo Bills. They kind of all came together and played as a team for the majority of the season. And they obviously, you get lucky. Some teams in the football, there's some luck involved. If you can minimize the injuries to your key players during the season, then I think Josh Allen is healthy at this point, and he's heading into the wild card playoffs with healthy-ish if you're playing football, obviously. But as far as his receiving core, and yeah, I think it's going to be hard, but I'll stick with my Bronco pick. Which brings me to my next, Green Bay versus Philly. Now I'm tossed. This is a toss-up for me. A lot of people picking Philly. Jalen Hurts is back. He's confirmed. Missed 2 games, right, with a concussion. So
yep.
Saquon Barkley is obviously going to be a big factor in this game. I'd like to hear your take first before I give my pick on who's going to win the game. So how do you see this game playing out between Green Bay and Philly? In Philly.
I really like this matchup. As a Cowboys fan, I can in good conscience pick the Philadelphia Eagles, so I'm going to pick the Packers. If just looking at it from an unbiased lens, it's really going to come down for the Eagles in terms of Saquon Barkley continuing that, hot running streak that he's been on. Obviously, they're coming off of the rest as well in the final week, and so that will certainly help Philly going into this game. But I look at Green Bay, and Jordan Love, I still think, is a solid quarterback. I really like Matt LaFleur. I just really like that branch of the Shanahan coaching tree, like, Shanahan, LaFleur, Sean McVay as well. Like, those guys, I think they just coach such great offenses and know how to utilize all the players to their maximum potential. And so I see that with LaFleur. I see that with the way that they've utilized Jordan Love. Of course, it's Green Bay. They have to get another franchise QB. Like, they just know how to get these franchise QBs off and running. I think Josh Jacobs has added a new dynamic to that running game that they hadn't had in years previous. They still have some younger receivers. They don't have that number 1 receiver that could really take over a game, but they have a lot of very good receivers, and they have good chemistry with Jordan Love. So I just like how this Green Bay team is coached. I think with Philly, the factors with them is, how is Jalen Hurts going to come out and play this season? The last year they had that big collapse. Last year they were on that losing streak, right? And then they collapsed. And I know that Hurts has gone to a Super Bowl in the past, but in recent years it's not been that same. Sirianni's always been a guy that you always question in terms of his temperament and how he's able to handle himself on the sidelines.
Absolutely. I think he's one of the worst coaches in the league. I don't know why. Yeah. I don't like him, and that temperament, the decision making he makes, is the things he says. That's just his demeanor. I have a hard time with that guy, and sometimes surprises me that players want to play for a guy like that. But that's beside the point, right?
And especially as a Cowboys fan, I can't stand him.
Right. That adds fuel to the fire, obviously.
Of course, he just and him jaw-jacking with fans and all that. It's in some ways, he's perfect for Philadelphia because he's, not afraid to let his mind be known. And Philadelphia is certainly that way. But in other aspects, I do wonder about his longevity. And you hear stuff about, players having to chat with him to kind of cool him down. And
right.
I do think he gets supported a lot of time because I think Howie Roseman is a solid GM. Drafting wide receivers aside, I think in terms of his ability to get players, you look at that defense and the players that they were able to get through the draft, and obviously on offense, Howie Roseman has been putting together some really consistent, strong teams, so I have to give him credit there. I like Jalen Hurts as a guy, and as a football player.
Yes.
I think I like his story a lot. Honestly, I would love him more again if he wasn't playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. But in terms of the story of him, and the character, I really like him a lot.
Absolutely.
But I look at this Green Bay squad, and they always, for whatever reason, in the playoffs, they always seem to turn it on. And maybe it's just my PTSD from last year's game with the Cowboys and the Packers, where they absolutely blew out the Cowboys and on the road, going on the road. I feel like it's very similar here, where they're going on the road against an NFC East team. Vibes are pretty good for this Eagles squad coming into the playoffs, and this Packers team is kind of under the radar. I got the Packers winning this one. I think they'll have enough, and they've got a well-coached team, and I think they'll be able to get around this Eagles squad.
I also am picking the Packers in this game. That was another one where I had a coin toss and I had long internal discussion because, like you, if I look just on the outside, it's the Eagles. I have no attachment to these teams. That means they're not in my division with the Steelers, and so I can appreciate your point of view coming from a Cowboys fan, but from someone like me that the fan and that has very little attachment. If I look at the Eagles, I'm like Saquon Barkley, Brown, Hurts. You're like, yeah, on paper, it seems they have a great quarterback, great wide receiver, and a great running back. So I'm going, okay, what's but there's just something, maybe it's the coaching, like I mentioned earlier. And then I look at the Green Bay Packers and I remember them last year in the playoff. And I remember how their season ended. And I always thought, I remember making a footnote going like, I think next year they're going to want to prove that they're going to make a step forward. I think there are a couple of games that Jordan Love missed due to injury kind of killed the momentum a little bit, maybe put something, obviously it's football, you got to deal with injuries. But here's something that jumps out to me when I looked at both teams as far as the wide receivers here on the team. So the Green Bay Packers have 4 guys all almost within the same. Like if I look at the specs, like 857 yards for Reed, Kraft 707 yards, 620 for Watson, and 601 for Dobbs. So there's not a big of a from the bottom guy to the top guy. And now if I look on the Eagles, they got Brown with 1,080 yards, and then Smith with 832, and then after that Goddard with 500, Galsatera, I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, 290 yards. So I think that Green Bay is going to be able to attack AJ Brown and then force Smith to make a couple big plays. And I think that the Green Bay Packers have relied on all 4 wide receivers this year, and that Jordan Love has been able to spread the ball around somewhat equally, which then as a defense leaves you questioning in what direction, and it makes it harder to double team certain guys. I feel like if they double team AJ Brown you could do it early on in the game maybe and see if Smith can make the big plays, and if they can find the routes with Smith. But I think Jordan Love is, and that might be, I don't know, I don't think it's a hot take. I don't believe it is, but I think Jordan Love is the better quarterback between him and Jalen Hurts. I think he's taken a step forward this season, even with the injuries. And I think they have a chip on their shoulder, and I think that they're going to come into this game wanting to prove a point. And I think the Eagles are the perfect team for them to make a point. They're a great team, and if they're able to beat the Eagles, which I truly believe they will, I think it's going to impact how they do going forward in the playoffs. Because I don't want to show my cards right away, but I have the Packers doing very well this season in the playoffs, and it starts by beating the Eagles. I wouldn't say they're going to beat them easily. I don't think the Eagles are going to fall apart like what we saw last year, but I think that at the end of the day, the Packers are going to be able to spread that ball around and use the running game and just get a victory here in the wildcard weekend.
I agree.
Let's move on to Commanders, Buccaneers. 2 teams that I've kept an eye on. I became a big fan of Jaden Daniels. I didn't know what to expect early on. Obviously, going back to the college football point early on in the episode, I've become more of a college football guy in the last couple of years. So I pay more attention to these quarterbacks that get drafted, especially in the first round or first couple of rounds. Jaden Daniels at the beginning of the season getting drafted with the Commanders. I didn't know what to expect. There was a lot of questions coming into the season, and I think he absolutely shut everybody up. That kid can ball. I became an immediate fan. I mean, they finished the season 12-5. I don't think a lot of people had them finishing second in the East. I mean, it's a great story, but at the end of the day, I think Baker Mayfield has this chip on the shoulder. I think he has healthy wide receivers heading into this game. I think their record does not show the team they are. I think they're more of a 12 win versus a 10 win. I think there's a couple of games there that if Mike Evans wasn't injured, I think they could have won, that they almost won. I think Baker Mayfield is the type of quarterback to go and win you a football game, especially at home, especially in the wild card. Yeah, I think I got the Buccaneers with this one. I think Baker Mayfield has a big game and he puts the Bucs on his shoulders and he just brings them forward in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm also picking the Buccaneers here. I think Washington has had a great story going into this year. New ownership. They finally get rid of the old Dan Snyder regime. They come in with a new coach in Dan Quinn, and they select Jane Daniels. And I remember at the time watching the draft and seeing Jane Daniels selected and thinking, oh, as a divisional rival, I think they got a QB.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of my more favorite quarterbacks coming out of the college football. I wasn't as high on Drake May when he was being looked at. I liked Caleb Williams, but I thought in terms of the most pro-ready guy, knew the offense and could translate better, and plus the organization and some of the coaching, I would look at. I was looking at Jaden Daniels and thinking, oh, he might make that transition much better. And now I think he's the rookie of the year at this point, the offensive rookie of the year,
Absolutely.
I should say. And so
I agree.
I think this Washington story has been really interesting to watch. I like you, I didn't expect them to be this good. I think they were going to be a little bit better than what people were going to give them credit for.
Right.
Mainly because I think Dan Quinn's a good coach, and again, a little biased there because he was the defensive coordinator at Dallas, and
Right.
I've seen how players react to him and surround him and buy into his system. The biggest question I had going in was, Cliff Kingsbury was the head coach of Arizona, like right from college to a head coaching job at Arizona, and he was clearly not fit for the role. Now he goes in as the offensive coordinator, and that was the role I thought would be better suited for him before going into the head coaching spot.
Right.
And I was like, okay, is his offense, like now he's an offensive coordinator, will his offense translate to an NFL system? Because it's based on the old Mike Leach air raid system, the Hal Mumm system of the air raid. And can that offense translate to the NFL? And right now, in this first year, it looks like it has, especially the way that Jane Daniels has adapted to it. Terry McLaurin continues to be one of the unsung wide receivers in the NFL, just consistently good each year.
I love
even
that
with
guy.
Yeah. Even with the QBs he's had, like, this is the best QB he's had since he's been in Washington. And I think he continues just being under the radar, wide receiver one, continues to show that he could be a guy. Brian Robinson Jr. being able to come back from getting shot last year. Very tough to get back from being shot.
Fucking football players
and then
get
being
built different.
Exactly. And then being a dynamic running back. And then, of course, when you have Dan Quinn in there, you're going to get at least a good defense because he will institute some of his systems in there. Bobby Wagner leading that defense. He's still solid even in his early 30s. And he's been able to lead that defense. They've moved off of some of their previous picks in years past. I think they got a good, well-rounded defense. So there's a lot to like in Washington, but I am picking the Buccaneers. I think that offense, like you mentioned, Baker Mayfield's got a chip on his shoulder. He's got the receivers. Bucky Irving at running back. I enjoy him, not only because he's got a great name, but also because he's been solid. And the defense there for Tampa Bay has also been pretty good too. So I think this will be a competitive game. I think this will be a back and forth. I think this will be a fun Sunday night game, but I am going to pick Tampa Bay to win this one.
Absolutely. Last game, Vikings versus the Rams. That's another game where I go, all right, so you got a 14-3 team playing a 10-7 team. I'm going, all right, what's going on over here? But Vikings are another team where I feel like 14-3, they played very well. Sam Darnold, I mean, what a story, right? At the beginning of the season, they draft this quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, and you're like, I love the kid. I think he might be a starter, and you might see him, and then all of a sudden he gets injured. He's out for the season. Now you got Sam Darnold that's gone from the Jets to the Panthers. Now he's in the Vikings, and then you go like, can this guy be a number one quarterback in the league? Can he be a number one quarterback? And I think he's proven that obviously under the right system and coaching makes a big difference. And the Vikings have always been a great team, a great organization. I think it's a prime example of that. Having a guy like Sam Darnold, which is obviously a great quarterback, just couldn't find the right fit. Now you got a right fit. Now you got a decision to make. But put that decision aside. Can they win a playoff game? I think they're going to win, but I think that it's going to be very. Look, I wanted to pick the Rams in this game. I think they got exposed during the last game against the Lions. I think if you show that you can pressure Sam Darnold enough that he's gonna collapse and not make the plays. I don't know if the Rams have the ability to be the Lions. That's, I guess, where I would stop and go. Maybe the Vikings still have enough offensive power to get over the hump against the Rams. I don't know if they'll fare well against whoever they see next, but I think we're going to have a closer game than I think a lot of people are expecting. And I think the Vikings will win at the end, but I don't think it'll be an easy win for them.
Yeah, I also was thinking about going Rams here, mainly because I think Sean McVay is such a great coach, and I think this is a really well-coached Rams team. And I think the offense that they have there with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, I think Stafford can still play at a high level, and they've got some solid running backs there in Los Angeles that I was looking at. That was like, yeah, and then you mentioned with the Lions game, Minnesota did not have a great game. In fact, the Lions absolutely dominated in that game. And so I wanted to lean to the Rams, but I am going to stick with the Vikings, mainly because I think that Vikings defense that's led by Brian Flores, and I know Flores is kind of a, if you ask the Miami Dolphins fans their thoughts about Brian Flores, I'm sure they'll have very different feelings.
Absolutely.
But as the defensive coordinator for Minnesota, I think he's done a tremendous job going in there and establishing one of the top defenses in the league in Minnesota. And I think that's also been beneficial to this Viking squad.
Right.
And obviously Darnold taking that step, and as you mentioned, a great story with Sam Darnold, and a guy I was rooting for as well. And he's got good receivers to throw to. Obviously Justin Jefferson, but he's also got Jordan Addison. TJ Hawkinson is back in the lineup after a couple of weeks off there. So there's a lot to like here with this Minnesota squad. But, you know, unfortunately, like a lot of these teams, I have to look at their histories and how they kind of get put together, and they have to prove to me that they can, you know, shake off their previous histories. And unfortunately with Minnesota, they're just a team that they've always had these tremendous teams. They've always had these very good put together teams. Like when Randy Moss was on their teams, and you know he had Dante Culpepper, or you know an old man Randall Cunningham throwing to him, or old man Warren Moon throwing to him, right? Like those were solid teams, but then they just could never. There was always that one thing, whether it be Gary Anderson missing the field goal, right, or all of a sudden blowing it against the lower seeded wild card team. There's always that one thing. And that's why this Rams game was screaming at me. It's like, there's always going to be that one that's going to stick in the craw of the Vikings. I think the Vikings just overall are a better team. I think O'Connell, who comes from that McVay system too, is part of that Shanahan tree. I think he's going to be prepared for this. And I think one of the bigger factors, and I know that with the Rams and their stadium, it's not exactly the greatest home field advantage. But now They don't have that advantage at all with what's going on there in LA with the Flyers.
Absolutely. That's a factor I completely forgot. The game's going to be in Arizona, right?
Right. So it'll be a neutral site. It's almost like a college football game in a way, because it'll be a neutral site game. So I look at all of that, and I think Minnesota will find a way to get the victory. I think it's going to be one of those hard-earned victories. I think LA will give them a fight for sure. I don't think it's going to be a runaway for Minnesota, but I do think Minnesota will come out with a victory.
We agree. Not on all of them, but we agree on most. So I'm looking forward to this weekend. I'm looking forward to watching my Steelers beat the Ravens, hopefully. Maybe I'll edit out, hopefully.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Let's pivot to something completely different to end the show. This week we saw WWE make their debut on Netflix. On January 6th, Raw debuted on Netflix and made a huge impact, I think, in the business of professional wrestling. My take on this whole thing, and I've been watching a lot of WWE television in the last few years. I've kind of, even after I became a wrestler, I wasn't really watching their product that much. I would watch it occasionally if I had time, but it wasn't a priority. And I think ever since Triple H took over, there's a shift in how they did things. They prioritized long-term storytelling, which is a huge thing that I think a huge factor on their recent success and being able to. I think it was necessary if you're going to go to a platform like Netflix. I think WWE is at a point where it's completely separated itself from anything else pro wrestling. I don't think WWE is the same thing, whatever you call it, sports entertainment or pro wrestling. It's still the business of I still see it as a business of professional wrestling. There's still some wrestling, obviously, in the show, but it is WWE. It's its own thing now. I think they've created that universe. I remember when they started using that term, WWE universe. And I thought that was very arrogant at first of them. I'm like, I didn't understand what they meant by that. But then I understood what they meant when I got into the business. And I was like, and it helped me become a better wrestler. Even to this day, it helps me if I see it from that perspective. They started calling it their own universe, and then they slowly started growing that universe to a point where people could detach themselves when they're watching the product. And I think they've done an incredible job building up these bigger than life character, which is at the root of WWE, what WWE was with Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior back in the day. I don't think those quote unquote gimmicks would work this, but I think the way they've been able to build their, not only their all around products, but the way they've been able to build their individual superstars as this in this universe and be able to make it resonate to people outside of that quote unquote universe. They've done a tremendous job. I think if you look at a thing like the Bloodline storyline, I think it's one of the most interesting storyline in the history of the business, the way they've been able to just keep working at it and molding it and shifting it and going in completely different directions while always working on the character development within the story and making sure that it makes sense. I think what I do now in the independent circus is a completely different product than what we see on WWE TV. And I think that's what they were able to amass this popularity to the point where Netflix, like, yeah, we're going to put you on our network and open it up to the global. And they were already working on getting global by going to, Saudi and all those places and Australia and, traveling, seeing way more shows here in Canada as well, even pay-per-views last year, this year, there's more and more. And I'm grateful for that. I think it's just an example on how WWE has kind of skyrocketed through the last few years. I'm happy for the product, but again, I want to be clear that I think that this makes them in the league of their own. I don't think that I can call what I watch on AEW the same as what I watch on WWE TV. I do not see it from the same perspective. I do not experience it the same, and I don't put myself in the same frame of mind when I watch the product. And it's the same thing when I go to an independent show. It's like sometimes I have friends that come and want to come and see me wrestle. I have to tell them, I said, have you been to a WWE show before live? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, it's not like this. I said, these guys, they wrestle for television. They're looking for the camera. They're wrestling for the commercial break. And they're really just there they serve a purpose in the bigger scheme. When you have an independent show, you're wrestling with the audience. That's the only camera you have is every single audience member, which I think makes it more challenging, if I'm being real honest. But I don't think it's the same product because I think you get to be a little bit more creative on the independent scene because you get to work with so many different guys and there's different factors. But I love what WWE is doing, and I think it's, at the end of the day, I think it's great for the business, which the business includes everything pro wrestling from New Japan to AEW. That's how I see it. But I think they're completely separated themselves, and I think it's going to be hard to ever dethrone them from the top of the mountain at this point, especially if Triple H keeps going the way he's going. I think it's a perfect example also that you put guys that have been in the ring before in charge versus guys that have never been in the ring before and have tried really hard in the thing. I think it's a completely different thing and a different perspective. And I think Triple H has done a tremendous job in bringing the product where it's at. And I'm just really happy. And I think this is a great thing for the business. And I think this is going to change a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And so just kind of put some context for some people. I do host a wrestling podcast each week called This Is Wrestling. And so we cover a lot of what's going on in the wrestling world, like what you mentioned with WWE. We have a review of Raw on Netflix that's out now that I highly recommend people listen to.
Absolutely.
So I want to get that plug in there because it is pro wrestling. We are all about selling, right? So, it's funny. So So the WWE product for me, for anybody that's kind of listened to the show or know anything about me, it doesn't resonate with me as hard as it does with other people. And I think that's just me watching everything week to week and just consuming a lot of pro wrestling. I think if you are somebody that's kind of on the more casual side of things or somebody that's not as ingrained in the wrestling side of things, I think you look at what's WWE has done, moving off of Vince McMahon and then going into more of what Paul Levesque has been able to do, Triple H, as you mentioned, from a creative side of things. I find the way that WWE presents their stories, it doesn't resonate with what I want in pro wrestling sometimes, because I find sometimes they focus too much on the outside of the ring storytelling stuff as opposed to in the ring. And I've always been somebody that's a guy that feels like what makes wrestling so great is what happens in the ring and that the stories that are being told in the ring. And so I have found that as WWE kind of progresses further and further, that they have kind of gotten away from it a little bit more and they've done more of the outside of the ring stuff. And so it's been tough for me to really resonate because I do really want to like it as much as other people do. But it just comes into conflict with what I believe pro wrestling is sometimes. I agree with a lot of what you said, though, when it comes to the business side of things. I think it's good that, from a business standpoint, that, WWE is on Netflix. And I do think WWE is in kind of a league of its own where I see AEW as a distant second at this point. And I look at the other promotions, they're having kind of a tough time. Like New Japan's peaks were in the 2010s. Now they've lost a lot of their big stars. And so they're kind of rebuilding. AEW is, their storyline quality has gone down in the last year, 2 years, I want to say. And so you're trying to see them. You want to see them at a better point when it comes to their creative quality. So I think that's also helped with WWE kind of being the go-to promotion for a lot of folks. But all that to say, like, I will say I'm a lot more critical of WWE than I think others are, because I think being number one, I think it comes with that sort of expectation, like, all right, they are the number one. This is what I expect them to be at number one. And so I can be a little tough on them sometimes. I won't lie, but but I'm also one of those guys that's tough on AEW because I feel like they should be a lot better than where they're at right now.
Especially with the talent they have on their roster.
Absolutely. I personally think, and this might be a hot take because we're all about hot takes on the show. This might be a hot take, but I really do think AEW has the best overall roster in professional wrestling, just in terms of in-ring talent and guys that could go out there and wrestle.
Right.
Like,
I'm not talking disagree stars. With you.
Sorry?
It's hard to disagree with that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, stars is completely different. Like, they don't have a Cody, they don't have a Roman.
Right.
A CM Punk anymore. They don't have that sort of guys, but in terms of just pure in-ring talent, I think they have the base to be an alternative and say, look, this is what WWE does. WWE is more focused on their storytelling and being sort of this bigger than life sort of promotion. We are going to try and adapt ourselves, say, hey, this is what they do. This is what we do. We are the one that does the in-ring wrestling. We've got all the great matches, and they're trying to do that with the where the best wrestle, but unfortunately, like, the storylines haven't kind of backed that up. But I look at the guys on an AEW roster like Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega, and I look at, Konosuke Takeshita that's also in there in AEW, and I just see these are high-level in-ring caliber guys. They just haven't been able to tap into it to be that next-level star that they're hoping for. And so in terms of the WWE on Netflix stuff and Raw, when I watched the show, I got to admit, I thought it was a slog to get through. There was a lot of pacing issues that I found with it. And in terms of just as a show of, you got all these new people that are coming in and you're going to watch this product, not just, Joe Schmo wrestling fan like me that's going to watch everything no matter where it's on. you got the people that are on Netflix like, oh, what's this WWE? In terms of establishing as I'm going to come back and watch next week, I really didn't think they did that great of a job. Everything felt like a conclusion on this show as opposed to we're setting up for what's going to happen in Rumble and at WrestleMania later this year. The only one they really kind of did that with was Cena entering himself to the into the Rumble. And so it's stuff like that that kind of like goes in confluence with me, but it's one of those things where at the end of the day, going into the streaming, we're kind of entering the streaming area now in wrestling, like you mentioned with WWE on Netflix. In the States, AEW is going to Max or is on Max, and so they're doing a dual cast there. We're kind of entering the streaming era, and so it's going to be much more widely available for fans. But at the end of the day, I think you still need to have a strong product in order to get those fans to stay in and stay tuned in. And so I think it's good for the business. We'll see how WWE is able to do on Netflix and where they go from there. Obviously, as Canadians, we benefit greatly from them going to Netflix because it's not just Raw, right? We get NXT, SmackDown, the PLEs are all on Netflix.
Me and my son been watching a lot of NXT the last few days.
There you go.
And NXT is by far my favorite product of WWE. And we've been watching, I think the pinnacle of their product was 2018, 2019, Undisputed Era and all those guys. I think that's what we were watching. My son kind of came in at that time and was watching a lot of that. So we've been watching a lot of their matches yesterday and even today and stuff. So guys like Roderick Strong and Kyle O'Reilly and all those guys, I forgot how really good they were. Like even like Velveteen Dream and like Ricochet, like all these guys that were like at the pinnacle of the NXT, especially with the North American title and stuff. I'll end it here though. As much as I praised, because there's a lot, I did throw out a lot of praise to WWE. And again, I've been a big fan of their product ever since Paul Levesque took over. I think they've gone uptrend. And I do agree with you that they kind of go heavy on the storyline and less on the wrestling aspect. I would love to see a lot more wrestling. Being a performer, being a wrestler, being a fan of combat sport, I want to see the physical aspect and I want to see the storytelling in the ring. I am a huge proponent of that. Not just have a wrestling match, but like you got to catch my emotions. And I think it starts with the presentation. I think WWE has a great opportunity to find a balance with what they're doing right now. I do agree that they're heavy on the storyline and that if they did turn it down a little bit and gave me maybe give me one more match per Raw or give me 2 more matches per Raw. They don't have to be 50-minute bangers or 30-minute bangers. Give me an 8-minute match between a guy just to showcase some talent, some quick storytelling. You can build up the story. I do agree with that. And I do agree that the premiere on Netflix was a bit clunky. Having the ability to showcase really what WWE is about, I don't think they were able to establish that. With the first episode, I will agree. It's a great point that you made that they seem to be ending a lot of the storylines and not beginning new ones or not looking forward to what the next thing is. And maybe it's a correction. Look, it's a new thing, right? I had these expectations for the first episode. I think there was an opportunity there to make it more theatrical because you have to. The way I saw it was like you're going to Netflix. So what do you do normally when you're on Netflix? You either look at TV series or movies. So your suspense of disbelief has to be at the optimal in order for you to enjoy the product. And I think that when you throw wrestling in there, there's an aspect of realism, obviously with the physical stuff. And I was very curious to see how they could present it in a way where it was more than what they did or different than what they did on cable TV, because you're not on cable TV anymore. You can't present it the same way. So I was expecting something a little bit more, for lack of a better term, grandiose, like a little bit more, maybe it could have been a change. You know what? Like I'm a geek for like change the filter of your camera. Show it from something else. You understand?
Yeah.
Either make it look more underground or more like film it with different, like just give me something new. Give me something new. Give me something that's going to go, yeah, you know. So, but I think there's an opportunity here, obviously, to grow. And I think Netflix will be extremely patient with them. And I don't think getting viewership is going to be an issue. I think silencing the critiques is going to be their focus, and or at least I think that's what they should be working on, because again, they're at the pinnacle. So you're finding stuff to critique while they're being successful. So we're not critiquing the fundamentals of the business, but we are critiquing the number one pro wrestling show in the world. So there's room for improvement. And at the end of the day, my whole point was just that I think it's just great for the business. I think it's going to bring forth a new generation of fans that'll get into the business. And that's always great when I am a guy that comes from that business. So
I always tell people that whenever I critique WWE, if I was critiquing their business, the way they made money, I would not be doing a wrestling podcast. I would have no listeners,
right.
Because they know how to make money.
Absolutely.
My critiques have always been with their creative, and I feel like that's always been fair game. And I think in the case of Netflix, I think you make a lot of great points of that as well. And I think additionally too, with Netflix, they're entering the live sports business too, and they want to, test the waters. And I think WWE is a perfect entry point because they've got an established audience and they can bring that audience with them. They can work out the kinks when it comes to live sports. We saw them try with the boxing fight, with the Jake Paul and Mike Tyson boxing fight, and also the NFL Christmas games. And so this is them trying to test the waters there. And again, WWE trying to expand its reach, try and make itself more accessible to a lot of people. And that's going to be big for them as well, to have that accessibility factor. But with the WWE stuff, I've always been, it's not resonated as much for me, and for anybody that's kind of listened to the show, I think I make it very clear in a couple of rants. But overall, it's just kind of looking at the wrestling industry. Like, I thought 2024 was one of the weaker years when it came to pro wrestling, just from a creative standpoint, storylines, business wise has been great.
Right.
Like you would think we're back in the Attitude Era if we're talking business wise, because a lot of the promotions are making money. So I have no concern about that. Just from a creative standpoint, I just wish the companies would do more. And I thought you made a great point as well with like filters or doing something different or whatnot. That's some of the same critiques I've had with AEW. It's like, you got to be different from WWE. Like, you can't present the same. You can't, like, you got to be different. And so stuff like that, I think, is such a great point in terms of making yourself stand out, especially in this wrestling industry and trying to get eyeballs.
I remember my first impression when I watched AEW when they came on cable television, when they were on TSN here in Canada. And my first impression was like, oh, you're trying real hard to make this look like WWE. And I'm like, this is, and I thought to myself, I was like, I don't think that's the right approach. I think you have an opportunity here to make it's like, you remember Lucha Underground?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's a perfect example. They went completely and I liked it because you were showing me something else while still showing me professional wrestling. I still got to see some physical alteration between two characters. And the storytelling and the presentation was appealing to me. Might not have been appealing to everybody, but for me, and like you said, like, to add to this point of show me something different, even if it's only the camera angles, the way you film something, or even if it's a filter, the way it's presented. Show me something, maybe a different ratio, maybe something that'll make you go like, ooh, and just, that's it. Because a lot of times these small changes, you're going to notice them at the beginning, and then after that, it's just going to become part of the show, and it's not going to be your first thing you notice after a while, right? Either it be like a change in color or filter or perspective, whatever it is. So I think WWE is doing great, and I think all around, I'm really happy for the all around business of professional wrestling. And I think it'll trickle down to I already think it does. It trickles down to the independent scene where I'm working, and which is great. I see a lot of people making more money, and smaller promotions starting to be more and more successful. So I'm really happy about that. So
sure.
Normally we end the show with a topic or a rant of choice. I will skip my turn because mine is not really time sensitive. So I'm going to push it back based on the time. We're already an hour and a half in. I always said I would try to keep those at an hour, but I knew with the NFL previews and the college football right now that it would go long, and I don't mind. But if you have a rant or a topic of choice that is right now, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I am a little bit of a blabbermouth as well. I
Me
like
too. Yeah.
giving my topics
Right.
too.
No, absolutely. When someone's, you got to cook, I let you cook. And then it's like, let's go. I know you're great at things. So yeah, no. I knew there was a lot of stuff to cover today, and I really wanted to cover as much as possible
For
because
sure.
it's a busy time of year for in sports. And I want to make sure that we cover a lot of this stuff. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. I've had episodes when I've done the wrestling podcast, like, oh, we'll keep this to 45 minutes,
right.
and it ends up being an hour and a half, an hour
Right.
45 minutes. So it goes a lot. In terms of rants, I'll kind of keep on my hockey theme
Right.
because I am just feeling all the hockey right now, just from calling it to watching it. I've just been injecting all of the hockey in my veins right now recently.
Beautiful.
I am an Ottawa Senators fan, and it has been a long, miserable road the last couple of years as an Ottawa Senators fan. No playoff appearances in the last, I think, 7 years. I think the last time they were in the playoffs actually was when Chris Kunitz scored in double overtime in
My
the Eastern
God.
Conference Final. And so it has been a long time for the Ottawa Senators, and they were showing a little bit of hope this year. And they were showing a little bit of hope. They traded for Linus Ullmark, who is one of the top goaltenders in the NHL. They got him from Boston, and he is now injured. It's like, okay, well, he's injured, but we've got our backup, Anton Forsberg. He got injured for a bit. Well, we have to call up our backup goalies in the AHL, both of them, to be in our rotation. And over here in Belleville, where the farm team is for the Ottawa Senators, we have had to sign some guys to professional tryouts as our goaltender to try and fill in the void because of the injury trouble. Now, Forsberg is back, but the way he's playing right now, it's like maybe he should just stay on the bench because he has not been good. And people want more of there's a goaltender named Levi Marilainen that's looked solid since he's gotten the call up to the Ottawa Senators, and they seem to like him a lot. But I just wanted to give out about the ongoing pain as an Ottawa Senators fan that we continue to go through. This was a year where, and still obviously a couple more months left, and still battling for a playoff position. So who knows? Maybe in a few months' time, I look like a whiny, can't accept that things are going okay. But right now, when it comes to the Ottawa Senators, I just wanted to kind of give out about them because I want things to change. They got new owners in Michael Andlauer, and I like the GM as well. And I once Allmark is healthy, I think we'll be back on the right track. But right now, it's just been a little up and down as an Ottawa Senators fan. Some great highs when they were on the big winning streak. I was feeling that high.
Right.
But currently, you are catching me in the midst of a low losing streak. So I'm hoping it gets all better in Ottawa.
It's tough as a fan, right? You want obviously your team to be successful as a fan all the time, but you also understand the sport. Like you're more than just a fan, especially you work in the industry, and you get to a point where you want your team obviously to be successful every year, but there's expectations. It was like that for me for the Steelers this year. It was like, and then you look at, like you, for example, you look at a team, sometimes the expectations, they look bright. You're like, man, this is going to be a great year. And then shit happens, injuries. And it tests your resolve, I guess, as a fan, right? But you kind of never been taught never to bail on a fan. And I see it as an opportunity sometimes when my teams are doing poorly to explore other team, not to, obviously I'm always going to be like, for example, for me, this season I'm a Giants fan. When it comes to baseball, San Francisco Giants, and I thought they had a potentially good season, and they didn't. Obviously, ends up like the last few seasons, which they just halfway through the season, pretty realized that they just don't have the talent to compete with the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks, and it makes you think like, oh man, I think I kind of, instead of stewing in my own shit, like just going like, what the hell is going on? And we tend to do that. I know. Even when my team's winning, even with the Steelers this season, I mean, the expectations weren't what they are now, and I'm still able to find a just critical perspective. It's tough though. It's tough, but sometimes I see it as an opportunity to see the talent and pay attention to other talent. And with baseball, which is a big part of my life, when I watch it, I love other players. I love watching the Bryce Harpers and the Ronald Acuna Juniors and all these guys, the Tatis, and it makes me watch games that I otherwise wouldn't watch, not because I'm a fan of the team, but because I'm a fan of the player. And I'm more of that now when it comes to sport. Like I'm more of a fan. I obviously have my teams. Like Steelers are going to be my number one sports team probably, and then you got the Giants. Then I got the Celtics. But I'll watch NBA game if my Celtics aren't playing. If if you got the OKC playing, I want to see Shea Alexander play, and I want to see the superstar play. There's a few guys I like. Same thing with baseball. Same thing with football as well. Like I enjoy watching other games because I like other players. And when your team's going through a funk, sometimes you want to just sit there and just, man, yeah, it sucks. I wish they would do this. I wish they would do that.
Right.
But I'll send some positive vibes. Maybe they can turn it around, your Ottawa Senators, and maybe they'll.
I'll take them. I'll take any sort of positive vibes we could get right now.
Right on.
I'll take it.
We'll make a push for the playoff. Maybe creep in on a wild card.
Love it.
Be great, man. It was a great episode. I'm grateful that you took the time. An hour and a half into this. It's great. I love what we spoke about today. I think is a great building block. Let's keep our fingers crossed that our predictions go through. And be watching a lot of football tonight, and I got my Steelers gear on, and I'm like, I gotta wear the Steelers shirt. They're playing at 8:00 tonight, I believe, so I'll be sitting down, getting ready. A lot of football. Looking forward for the championship game, and hopefully I'll have a lot to talk about in the next episode of Blue Collar Sports. Zach, thanks again, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Sounds good. Looking forward to that.
All right, cheers.